Hey everyone, this is Dave Pike, Motorcity Mechanic. Today I've got a video on a 2011 Dodge Avenger. It's got the 2.4 liter 4-cylinder engine. I'm going to show you step by step how to remove and replace the intake manifold assembly. Alright, before you do anything, I want you to disconnect that negative battery cable. That's the most important thing. So go ahead and get that disconnected, and then we'll move on to get started on that intake manifold. One of the first things we want to do before we start worrying about getting this intake off is we need to get it helped to get the air cleaner assembly out of the way, as well as the rubber boot that goes from the upper portion of the air cleaner assembly down to the throttle body. Once we get that out of the way, we'll have a little more room to get to a few things. So that's going to be our first step. The rubber boot's held on with a radiator hose clamp. Has an 8mm, so you can back that off, wiggle it, get it out of the way. You've got a hose that leads up to the valve cover assembly. Wiggle that off. We've got the air temp sensor right here. Got a single stage connector. Press in on the lock, release it. Now we can get the upper portion off by releasing the two latches on the front. Pick it up, move it off to the side. Get the air filter out here as well. Now the rest of the box is held in for 10mm right here, and you've also got a metal bracket on this bottom corner here. The wiring harness follows right below it, and that bracket is part of that harness. I'm going to reach up under it, wiggle it, and get it out of the way. Now we're going to move on to that 10mm. Now the box is going to be loose. Now we want to go ahead and get the snorkel off as well. There's going to be a plastic Christmas tree fastener over here on the corner, so we'll need to pop that up so we can get it off together. Use a little regular trim panel remover right here. Get up under here and start working that fastener up. Alright, now we've got it out of the way. Go ahead and start pulling up on the assembly. Get it up out of my way. That snorkel goes down inside the box, as you can see. It's got a couple plastic or rubber grommets here. Got some pegs go through, and then of course you got the 10mm on the front that we took off. Now we can get access to the boot. It's held down on the throttle body with the same kind of radiator hose clamp with an 8mm. We'll go ahead and back that out and wiggle this off. Now you can use either, like I said, an 8, or if you want to use a regular flat tip screwdriver, you can back off this hose clamp as well. And now that I've got it backed off, I can go ahead and wiggle it, get it up out of the way. Now sometimes what you'll find is there's a wiring harness that has a Christmas tree fastener that goes through this little hole right here, so you have to work to get it off. This one doesn't have one on it currently, but some vehicles do, so pay attention there. You may try to get the boot up and something's holding it. Probably the harness is held in place right there. Now that we've got a little more access to it, we've got to work on repositioning this harness. The things we're going to unhook is the injectors. We're going to unplug those. We're also going to work on unplugging that fuel rail right here where the fuel line goes in. And we've got a few little things as far as Christmas tree fasteners that route this harness down that we need to reposition. Another thing we need to worry about is getting the whole dipstick out of the way. It goes right down the middle of this intake right here, so once we get out of the way, that's good. So I want to work on getting the injectors disconnected, and we'll work on getting that fuel line disconnected. Yeah, the injectors have what I call a 2-stage lock. You've got a red lock right here that you've got to pull up on. Once you get that pulled up, then you've got to squeeze further down, and there you go. So like I said, it's a 2-stage. You got your red lock right there, and then the black portion right here. You'll squeeze in on that to release it. Now I've got one of them undone. I've got to repeat this on the other 3 as well. Now the fuel line has a quick disconnect. The green portion right here, you would actually squeeze in on. Once you squeeze in on it, you can actually take the line off. The green piece will stay on this elbow here. It actually goes into the cutouts right here. Now, proper procedure for bleeding this down would be disconnect or remove the fuel pump relay if it has one. Crank the engine, let it run till it stalls, and then you could go ahead and disconnect this and won't have to worry about a spray of fuel. If you're not going to do that procedure, at least put some rags around everything when you squeeze it, so if there is any pressure, you'll catch it with the rag. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and I've squeezed it. I'm going to go ahead and start working it off. Like I said, I'll put a rag around it just in case. There we go. We've got the fuel line disconnected and we got the 4 injectors done. Now the harness that goes along the top of this intake, just in front of the fuel rail, is held down with these 2 gray, they look like wire ties, but they actually hook on the studs that stick up. We need to go ahead and release those. So you can just grab them with anything. I'm using a pair of needle nose, work them up. You may even be able to grab them by hand and slowly work them up. There we go. They actually go onto the studs that hold the fuel rail down. So we need that out of the way so we can, when it's time to get the intake off, we can get to everything. So now we're going to move on to disconnecting the map sensor. Now the map sensor is just like the fuel injectors. They have a 2-stage lock. We've got to pull up on this red portion here. And once we pull up, we've got to squeeze in them right here. Now for some reason the map sensors, when you try to use that secondary lock, there's from time to time they don't want to release well. When you get one of those that doesn't, you know, you can probably get up in here, is on the back side where the lock is. I use a screwdriver to help me get it up as far as getting the lock released and then pull the connector. Just for some reason there's not enough leverage when you're prying down on here to get them released, but it always seems to be this style connector for the map sensor. So we'll go ahead and reposition that. Now on your intake runner valve right here, we got to disconnect the connector. Some of them have a 2-stage lock as well, so you'd have to slide down on this side, the red lock, and squeeze in to get it off. This one, the secondary lock's gone, so I just got to squeeze in and pull down. And that way we'll get the short runner valve disconnected. Now the harness right here that came down from the injectors, they go down here to the side of the intake, and it has a plastic Christmas tree fastener on, basically like a wire tie. So it's helping position the harness to make sure it don't rub on something it's not supposed to. We need to go ahead and get that loose from the intake. I'm using my basic trim panel removal tool. We'll try to work it off the best we can. There we go. Now we got the harness off on that corner. Now we can start moving on to a few more things. Next thing we're going to start working on is the throttle body. We've got a bracket we got to take off, and we got a connector. Now the connector for the throttle body right here has a lock on both sides basically, so you kind of squeeze it in. As you squeeze in, you'll work it loose. You may even have to rock it slightly to get it off, but you've got one on this side and one on that side to release it. Now the throttle body itself has a bracket. You can actually see a portion of it right here. The throttle body is held to the intake with a total of 4 10mm bolts. The 2 up against the block here actually go through a bracket that has a 13mm that goes up against the transmission. So you work on getting that 13mm off, and then we'll worry about getting the 410s off, because this throttle body will be reused while the intake won't, so I will have to take it off no matter what. So we'll go ahead and get it off now while I'm taking the bolts off. Now we got all the bolts taken off. They're all the way backed out. These 2 are still held in place with that bracket. Let me go ahead and get them off to show you. Here's that bracket we mentioned where the 13 goes through there. You got your 2 10s. Now the throttle body comes off. We'll set that to the side.